You're tuned in to Getting to the Root of It, focusing on healing and letting go of the wounds of addiction and other unresolved traumas of the past. Your breakthrough begins with you. Are you ready to change your life? Stay tuned as your host, expert therapist, personal development coach, and spiritual cheerleader, Natashah Khan inspires you to live the life you were destined to live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Getting to the Root of It. You're here with me today for another exciting episode. I have a bunch of different guests joining me this evening as we are going to be talking about communication. We have a lot of families out there that listen to my podcast and always have questions about communication and what can they do to improve their communications with their loved ones or with friends or with coworkers, etc. So today I want to introduce you to some very special people in my life and a beautiful couple who has taken the journey of recovery. And they're going to introduce themselves shortly to talk to you a little bit about how their lack of communication had a very significant role and a negative impact in their marriage and in their relationship. But as they both took the road to recovery and started learning more about healthy communication and how to be more assertive in their lives, how that really transformed and restored and repaired the broken parts of their marriage and their relationship. So without further ado, let's first introduce Miss Alaina, and then we will introduce Nathan and Stephanie. Alaina, welcome to the show.
I'm back. So I guess I haven't, got scared off yet, but so I am Alaina Phelps. I'm the family therapist at the Robert Alexander Center. I have worked very closely with Natashah, as you all will likely or have already learned in the last podcast that we did. So I am just here to kind of help out in this conversation and see where it goes.
All right. All right, Nathan and Stephanie, will you guys take a minute and just introduce yourselves to our audience? Tell us who you are, where you're from.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I'm Nate, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. Yeah, absolutely.
Where are you from, Nathan?
Louisville, Kentucky.
And how long have you been sober?
16 months.
Congratulations. That's huge. How exciting. Yay. All right. That's 16 months. How much time did you go to treatment, and how long were you in treatment?
How long did I go to treatments? Since 2020, I went in and out of treatment 9 times.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, for between 21 to 38 day stays, except for 2.
Okay. And so can you share a little bit of what made it different and why this time it stuck for so long?
The determination is a lot of it. Having people that support me, and understanding that people do care, has a lot to do with it also.
So when you talk about that support system, are you talking just about, a therapist and a sponsor and people in your sober network, or does that include family as well?
Family, my wife, absolutely my support group, outside, work. I'm part of a men's group that helps tremendously. Just being out there socializing, networking with people, coming together.
Nice. Thank you. All right. Miss Stephanie, would you introduce yourself? Tell our audience where you're from as well. And, why did you choose a path of recovery? If your husband is the one that sought treatment and sought help for his addiction issues, tell us a little bit about you and how you came to find this path or road to recovery.
So I got to the path of road to recovery from anger and rage, like just being completely done with it all. I have been in recovery since December of 2020, because that's basically when I had my breakdown and had enough. Codependency, not alcohol or anything like that. I can't say I'm from Louisville. That pains me. I'm from Dallas. But I live in Louisville currently. hopefully someday we'll get back.
So you're a diehard Texan is what I'm hearing.
Yes, I am. Absolutely. I cannot say I'm from Kentucky.
You're not allowed to go back to Texas. What?
Yeah, it's not. The kids are here.
So let me ask this question. When your husband was in and out of treatment a few times, like he had mentioned, prior to your breakdown or the meltdown that you'd had, did you think at any point when he was going in and out of treatment back then, did you think that you needed to recover from anything? Did you think that you needed any kind of healing, or did you think that this was his issue that he needed to figure out on his own?
I think like most people, they think they go into recovery and that somehow fixes them, or they go into rehab and that somehow fixes them, and it doesn't. I didn't realize there was so much more work that had to be done. Yeah, the first 5 or 6 times I thought he was actually, it was all about him. Like, he's the one that needed to change. And he did, but I didn't realize I did too, so.
So what made it different for you this last time? What happened? Did you have a conversation with anyone? Like, what clicked for you to say, okay, well, wait a minute. It's not just my husband needing to get help. Apparently there's something within myself that maybe I need to take a closer look at.
So there was this really nice family therapist that told me I needed to go to therapy.
Okay. and I wonder who that is. So just so that my audience knows, we're all chuckling here and we're all laughing here because the family therapist that she's referring to is Miss Alaina Phelps, who was her family therapist at the time.
She was my.
She was Nathan's therapist during his time there in at Robert Alexander Center. So let me ask this: did you hear that request for you to go to get therapy? Was that in the first phone call, several phone calls in? Like, how soon into working with the family therapist were you advised that you needed to seek some therapy or additional therapy?
I'm probably not the norm on that one, but I kind of got it in the first meeting.
So I have to ask, how did it feel? You're coming into the session, like, you know, have you ever done family therapy before with your husband?
No, she was my
very first.
Yeah.
So your very first family therapist, you sit down with her, you kind of don't know what to expect. I know for most families, and myself included, you go into that first therapy session and you think it's going to be about your loved one, right? Your husband, your wife, whomever that partner may be, your son or daughter. So when you heard she's telling you that you need, you know, therapy or trauma therapy, share with us, please be candid. What was your first thought? What were you thinking? What were you feeling when you heard that?
What the hell did I just walk into?
Okay.
Well, it was funny because she actually got him to say more things than I'd ever got him to say. So like that's what made me think, oh, maybe this woman has a point. So it just, yeah, she floored me completely.
Because you weren't expecting that. You didn't think that for a second that you would be the one that would be asked to do this trauma therapy.
Yeah, and I didn't really agree with her until I was probably halfway home and I'm texting her bawling going, okay, what? Like, what just happened? Because I need you to explain it to me for real this time. I might actually listen because I wasn't listening to you the first time.
And I need to clarify here. It was the start of a wonderful relationship.
It is. Yes. Oh, yes.
So in that moment when you're being, now, was she specific that moment of asking you about trauma therapy? Like, did you say trauma therapy, Alaina? Or did you just say?
Are you all okay with me kind of breaking it down a little bit of what happened?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we were in the session, and the purpose of the session was we were actually focusing on communication. It was the first family session that they had ever had. Most family therapists, especially in inpatient addiction treatment, they're not going to dig super deep in that family session. It's more so about how do we learn how to meet each other where they're at and work on a way to move forward. And so I wanted them to build that foundation. So we did a lot of work. I did a lot of work with Nate. He did the legwork. I gave him the tools, and I was like, we have to really focus on the emotion aspect of it. And he did that. He did really well with it. He was actually doing the homework I was giving him. He probably journaled more than he ever thought he would in his life. I'm sure he still has the feelings wheel in his back pocket. It's something that, we really did a lot of this work. And I was like, okay, now I need to give you and your wife the tools to use this at home. And I had spoken to Stephanie on the phone a few times before, but they were very brief. It was just kind of like an introduction. I was still kind of new into the family role at the Robert Alexander Center. And so when she came in and we started having these conversations, it was almost as if, and Stephanie, remember, we have a great relationship. It was almost as if he brought in this emotion and her wall went straight up. And so as I saw the wall going up, it wasn't that she didn't want to hear that from her husband. I know that she had, like she said, she got him, I got him to say a lot of things that she hadn't got him to say that she wanted him to. She wanted to hear it, but emotionally you could tell she wasn't ready to receive it. And so as we continued the conversation, I was like, have you ever experienced any trauma in your life? And I, just blatantly asked that question because I was like, okay, we're at a good spot here. We're going to see how this goes. And she kind of looked at me like, wait a second, right? We just took the focus off of him and put it on me. And she was like, just kind of like nodded her head. She never answered. And that was when I was like, this is something I really think could be beneficial for you if you want to continue these conversations. And I could tell, right? I knew that wall was up. So I knew I wasn't getting very far. I knew that, in that session, she probably didn't hear me. And that was okay, because like she said, as she left and kind of processed it a little bit, as the wall started coming down, she was able to kind of process it. But it was kind of like this foundational piece of, you all really want this good communication. I mean, Nate had the same thing too, right? He had to also tear down his wall. But of course, one-on-one, we could do that, right? I didn't have that opportunity with Stephanie. And so I was like, we got to break down these walls to even get this foundation of communication, or you're never going to get what you got out of this session.
Why is that? Why do I have to work on trauma? And I'm sure some of my listeners are asking the question, why do I have to dig up my past and talk about the trauma? And why do I have to talk about those things in order to communicate with my partner?
Well, I'm going to deflect this a little bit to Stephanie and Nate here. And I'm going to answer it briefly, but like I had said in that session, prior to meeting Stephanie in the family session, Nate had walls with me, right? I mean, everyone has walls whenever you don't know somebody, right? We got to build that trust. And you have to take this approach of, currently what you're displaying is a reaction off of something that has happened in the past, right? So this wall that's coming up has nothing to do with me and you right now. There is something deep rooted back here that is making you react in that way. And so whenever I mean, you can almost see it, as a therapist, I guess you kind of learn this stuff. But when you're talking with someone, it's almost like you can literally see the wall coming up in their eyes, right? And it's just like, well, if I just lost them, right? And so you have to start kind of digging, but kind of pointing it back to Nate and Stephanie, do you think, like, thinking about some of the individual work that you all have done, because I know both of you all have taken the time to do that, do you think if you ever would have done that individual work, you would have been successful in improving your communication with each other?
Absolutely not. Because
not doing it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I needed some reassurance. I needed to understand that I could trust, right? I like how you said trust and traumas, what happened in the past, even if it ain't a trauma, right? Just having your words and your feelings and stuff like that used against you, that's going to put that wall up. That's going to deter me from telling anybody how I feel, whether I care about you or not, whether I know you or not.
It's a really good point.
I think if you don't work through that anger, you're going to take that anger out on everybody else anyway. Even if you don't know that's what you're doing. Like, it took me a very long time to realize that's what I was doing to other people. That wasn't necessarily mad at them.
Wrong place, wrong time sometimes, right?
Yeah, you just walked into the wrong spot.
Well, and I think too, kind of going towards this question, thinking about, and you all can answer this, however you want to, but thinking about like when you were younger and the relationships that you had when you were younger, how were you talked to then? How did you react then? Were you given an open, safe space to communicate, or were you shut down? Or using Nate's words, right? Like, either growing up when you were younger or in current, not current, but, pre-recovery current, were things thrown back in your face, right? Like I'm openly sharing with you how upset this is and, how hurt I feel. And then you just throw it back in my face, right? Like thinking about all of those interactions that you've had from the time you were younger to, today, that reflects how you interact with other people, right? It gives you, we're going into a whole other topic here, which I'm not going to go too far because it's for a whole other podcast that you can do. But your communication styles, it's learned behavior, but it also is a basis of your core beliefs of yourself, right? So if I don't feel like I'm worthy enough of speaking up because people have silenced me in the past, well, guess what? I'm going to be a lot more passive in my communication. If I'm not ever given a space to talk, or I'm shut down, whenever I do talk, but I also know that I have to get my point across, right? Then I'm going to be more passive aggressive. It's like, hey, I really need to get this point across, but also like, I'm really scared you're going to shut me down. So I'm like teetering back and forth here, right? Or if you grow up in a household where you just got to yell to get heard, right? And not necessarily saying that aggressive means that you're yelling all the time, right? But if you have to be very prominent in your conversations and very almost like overly direct and things of that nature, then yeah, you're going to have more of an aggressive communication style. Assertive communication is not a common thing we see in society anymore, right? And so thinking about how you were younger and how that plays in your relationships now, I mean, it has a lot to do with your communication style.
So I think that's a really good point, which I'm going to get into, and I'm going to ask each of you individually in just a minute, just for our audience and for our listeners out there. So what Alaina just recapped was the 4 to 5 primary communication styles that most oftentimes that we use, right? And we use them, and communication is something that's learned, right? Just like how behavior is learned. So I'm going to list the different types of communication styles, and it's helpful to each of us that are listening to really reflect on what our communication style is, and looking at how what we believe to be true plays a part in that particular communication style. And then I'm going to open it up to some questions to you guys. So we have those that communicate passively. We have those that communicate passive aggressively, others that communicate aggressively and or manipulatively. The reason why we find ourselves communicating that way, we have struggled to learn on how to ask for what we need. Maybe when we were younger, and this all kind of stems back into childhood. I know many people are not fans of therapists because we're always exploring what happened in your childhood, right? But the reality is that's where we learn how to communicate either well or not well. And so if I believe that I'm not being heard, or if my opinion doesn't matter, or if I believe that every time I speak I'm being dismissed, then there's a high likelihood I can be passive. But for someone else, based on their life experience, and they have that same shared belief system, they actually could be really aggressive. They may want to be in your face all the time, telling you like it is, because now they have the opportunity to speak freely. But the reality with all of those communication styles is no one's really conveying what they need. When we look at assertive, that's what we're striving to be. We're striving to be assertive in our communication styles so that each person in the dynamic of the relationship we're creating a space where we can share with each other what we need from each person in that dynamic, right? So what I want to do is I want to open it up to Nate and Stephanie, and I want to ask first, what was your communication style before, right? And now with this wonderful therapy that you have received from Alaina, and the internal work that you both continue to do, I want you guys to kind of share with us how your communication has progressed over time. So Nate, tell me a little bit about, based on the communication styles I just mentioned, do you identify with one particular one, or do you find that you may have communicated in all of those different ways over time?
So I was all of the above, especially in addiction, right? Because I'm selfish, and I didn't want to talk about my feelings and stuff like that. I didn't want to show them unless I was getting something out of it, right? So I was very manipulative with my communication. because at the end of the day, I want what I want. It's my substance. So I really use that to my advantage. All them styles, right? If I didn't get what I want, I got very assertive and angry. I start raising my voice. After working with Lainey and having to understand my feelings, find my real feelings, which really sucks.
I love the way they both said that in sync.
It's necessary, right? So, my communication style now is dependent, right? It depends. The circumstance. Where am I at? With me and Stephanie, we talk more about what's going on in our lives, right? Of course, we can't get into too much of my work or her work,
sure,
or what happens in our support groups, right? But I can see that she now knows where I'm coming from, right? She's understanding me a little bit better, so I can be a little more assertive with her, a little more direct.
So her ability to understand you allows you the space to feel safe, to open up and share and communicate what's really going on with you. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
In some things, right? And then some things I'm still passive over. Very passive. Like, where is she at? Is she really in a place to receive this? If say, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes, you had said this earlier to me, and this may have been before we started the show today. Sometimes that communication style for you changes based on how well you know the person, or based on
where they're at, like especially in recovery. I work in recovery also. I'm a BHT at the Robert Alexander. I work with Lainey. Yay.
He's a gay.
I love it. But no, so like in the detox or wherever you're at in your recovery, like where are you at? Where are you able to receive? What level do I need to be passive with you? I really have to be mindful of who I'm talking to. Where are you at? Are you in a place to accept it, or receive it? Am I doing more good than not? Right. But right now I'm really working on just being more direct, because I'm getting to the place where I'm trying really hard to understand that as long as I do the best I can by explaining something and talking to you, I can't take it on myself how you react.
100%. And I think you make a really good point, and you've just dropped a few tips. So I just kind of want to go over it for our listeners. When we are practicing assertive skills, it's very important to recognize where someone is at, right? Like you said, being able to recognize whether they're in a position and if they're emotionally and mentally ready to receive what you have to say. But even still, if someone is not mentally and emotionally ready to receive it, it doesn't mean that you can't still communicate with them. But right. You have to be mindful how you say it, right? Mm-hmm. What you say, how you say, tone of voice, right? Whether you're going to stare them down and, with eye contact, or you're going to, be kind enough to not, be, some of us can speak with our eyes, right? And we can kind of be lethal with the way we just kind of look at someone. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes. So
body language is very important.
Thank you. You just took the words right out of my mouth. Absolutely. So body language, tone of voice. So at the end of the day, these are the things that we need to still practice. We still need to say what we need to say, but we have to assess the situation and the individual that we're interacting with first, right? Because there are some people, I have two daughters where one daughter can take information very directly, but I have another daughter who I can say the same thing, but I can't take the same approach, right? Because she's going to receive it very differently than my older daughter. So I do like that, because I think it's very beneficial for people to understand that you have to be not just mindful of what you want to say to others, but be mindful of where people are at in their ability to receive what you have to say. And sometimes timing is important. I was actually getting ready, Elena, maybe this is part of what you want to say. Is timing important? Because I may want to say something to my loved one, but if they're in detox, maybe it's not the right time to say something.
Bingo. Our brains are connected here. So, and that was kind of, and I'm going to kind of direct this to Nate a little bit, and then possibly Stephanie too. So hang tight there, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Nate, so you've been to treatment, I think you said 9 times in 2020. When you go into treatment and you're in detox, which is typically about a week, do you want to have conversations with Stephanie? In the middle of detox.
I want to talk to her. Yes. Do I want to have a conversation with her? Absolutely not.
Right.
And basically the only thing I want to do is try to, well, I was in detox anyway, to be completely honest. All I wanted to do was, do I have a place to come home to? How can I sugarcoat all this? And a lot of it was, look at me, look what I'm doing. I'm doing the thing for you,
Yeah. So would you say, like, in detox, because, being the family therapist at an inpatient treatment center, I have a lot of families, I call them within the first 24 to 48 hours, and they're immediately like, I want a family session. When can we schedule it? Right. Would you say, if I were to come and pull you out of detox and say, hey, I scheduled a family session with Stephanie, get up, we're going to the family session. How do you think you would have reacted in that moment?
Probably the same way I reacted the first 2 times you tried to get me the last time I was in treatment. Get out of my room. Don't talk to me.
Which is common, right? And I want to make this very clear. It was something that Nate said earlier. He wanted to talk to Stephanie, right? Like, there is a part, obviously they miss your family, right? Like, you did miss Stephanie. You wanted to talk to her. That's probably your safe space. But also at the same time, your mind is still very sick. Right. So as much as you missed her and you probably did want to smooth things over with her immediately, and you even said it, your mind went straight towards, how do I manipulate this?
Absolutely.
Right? And so then it's also too, like, you don't feel good on detox. Most people don't. If they say they do, they're lying through their teeth. Right. I don't feel good. So like you said, the first few times I tried to get you up, it was like, leave me alone, get out of my room. I don't want to talk. Right.
It's very manipulative, and it's fear driven, a lot of it. I was very uncomfortable, which most people in detox are, right? We're uncomfortable, we're scared, we don't know the outcomes. And as addicts, we can use that as fuel to our manipulation, right? Because our loved ones can hear it in our voice, right? And I think that's, hey, come get me. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm. So then let's move in. Okay, so you've completed detox. I didn't come bother you and get you up for a family session. We're all good. You get over and it's your first week in residential. And so typically on the first 1 to 2-ish, 3 days of residential, I'm calling the families again saying, hey, they're going through residential, and they're like, okay, great, they're out of detox. I need a family session this week. Do you still think that, like, that's an appropriate time to do it? Or do you think that's still too soon?
And it's still too soon. I needed time to work with my therapist, right? I needed time to start working on, what am I even going to say? How am I really feeling? What really is going on here? At that point, we're still going to have the same talks as we did before I came into treatment. It's still that wall's still there. Not to say that wall's lifted when I come out of treatment, right? Because it's not all the way down yet. We're getting there. You can see my eyes a little bit now, But yeah, that's still too soon, because I still don't know how I'm feeling. I still don't know what to say. I still don't know how to communicate.
So let me ask this question, because I think maybe this can shed a little perspective for those listeners today that have loved ones that are in the treatment space. What did you want for your wife? I hear, and I really appreciate you being very candid of, you're very scared and you're fearful of the unknown, and you're still trying to sort things out for you. What did you want for your wife now that you were there and she was at home? Did you have any sort of desire of what you would have liked to see happen for her?
The first 8 times, no, I didn't. I wanted her to be okay. Right. I was still delirious. I was still under the assumption, it's something that I said, and I think most addicts say, I'm only hurting myself.
Right.
I didn't do nothing to her. I'm doing it to myself. But each time I was seeing the same things, I was coming back out, right, with the same problems. We're still not communicating. You're still coming at me sideways. You're still accusing me of things, right? So in my head, I was able to justify going out and using again, right? That's the one thing I loved about the Robert Alexander Center, and the way Lainey approached me. She was like, "Look, what keeps you coming back, right? What do you need to work on?" And when I said that, communicating with my wife, like we argue. We argue. Or if I'm not using, we argue, because guess what? I wanted to manipulate her and to get me something, or justifying why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so when me and Lainey started out, and I hated the exercise, she told me throughout the day, like once an hour, I had to this feelings wheel, and I had to look at it. And
it's a pillow now.
Once an hour, I needed to recognize how I was feeling. And man, it's crazy how your feelings change minute by minute, hour by hour. After working with her, right, for what? It was about at least a week and a half, 2 weeks on residential before we even started talking about the family sessions. But after meeting with her and learning how I'm feeling and getting more comfortable with them, I guess, with them feelings, feeling them, then we was able to bring Stephanie in. And then Lainey gave me tools of how to say it, how to express my feelings to Stephanie. Right?
So, Miss Stephanie, now the baton is passed to you, because I hear all the work that your husband had to do on his end, because he can't communicate for both of you, right? He can only communicate for his part. So coming into this conversation, did you think that you had to make any changes to the way that you communicated, or do you think that your communication was fine?
Before or after?
Let's start with during that session, when you came into that session.
During that session, there was nothing wrong with me. I don't know what y'all are talking about.
Got it. Listen, and we laugh about this, but I want my listeners to understand. I want everybody to make sure you're listening to Stephanie very carefully, because we do have a lot of families and loved ones that when they hear that their loved ones are ill, we hear it often. It's not my issue, it's theirs. There's nothing that I need to do. Right. And one of the reasons why we're doing this show is we want people to understand that this is a family disease. So your loved one may be using drugs and alcohol, but it's just beyond the substances. What Nate shared with us today, his communication problem wasn't because of drugs and alcohol. His communication problem stemmed since he was a young boy, not knowing how to communicate effectively. And that has just gotten worse. Using made that worse. And that translated itself or transferred into your marriage, which affected the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So, Miss Stephanie, once you came into the clear and this therapist is telling you need trauma therapy and you need all these things, what would you say your communication style was like? How did you communicate to Nate in your relationship, whether he was using substances or not?
Prior to, I would definitely say I'm passive aggressive and manipulative.
Okay.
I was pretty good at that, and I had to be. Definitely with the case of, for lack of a better word, RBF. because you had to have that shield, because it's like you couldn't make it through any of it without it until you start dealing with yourself. Like, it was easier to argue with him than deal with me.
I appreciate you being really honest. That's a very introspective thing and very insightful for you to admit that, because I don't think a lot of people can look at themselves and say that that's why I did what I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at what point in that journey did you realize you needed to change that style of communication, or that it wasn't working anymore?
So I think I'm still changing it.
Well, if you looked at the way you were commuting when he was in active addiction, he's now, how many months sober now? Do you see any improvements in the way? I'm not going to ask Nate. I'm going to ask you, do you see any change in the way that you communicate today than you did then?
Absolutely, because you don't always have to go to an argument, right? So not everything has to be an argument. There are conversations we don't have to have. There are conversations that I have with my support group and he has with his support group. It's knowing what to talk to each other about, because there's still some conversations that aren't safe for us to have, and they will be someday, but it's not time yet.
So this comes back to timing, like what we were saying earlier, right? Knowing what you want to talk about and when is the appropriate time to talk about it.
And then there are probably some conversations that never have to be had.
Let me ask you this, because you talk about timing. If you wanted to talk about something right now, but you knew timing wise it wasn't good for him, what do you do with what you want to talk about? Do you hold on to it? Do you suppress it? Do you get bitter and frustrated because you are ready to talk about it, but you know that they're not ready to receive it, or there may not be in a space to talk about it? Like, what do you do with that?
I call a friend. I call and make sure I'm not sounding completely crazy before I would talk to him about it. And if I have to make sure I'm in a space where I can stay calm if it's something that's gonna get my blood pressure up. And if it would, then that's not a conversation we need to have.
So seeking your own support system and sort of processing or talking about it with someone else to really see, like you said, is this something that we really need to talk about not right now, or can I wait on it, etc.
And sometimes just talking to your support group, that's enough to get it out. Like, once you have that conversation, like, oh, this really isn't as big a deal as I had made it in my head.
So a lot of times, because that's a conversation I typically have, right? A lot of families will sometimes say to me, I need to talk to them about this. They need to tell me that they did, everything that they did. They need to tell me, all the lies that they told. They need to tell me all the details. They need to, right? They have all these things that they just need to know, right? They need to have a conversation about. Do you think, like, if someone were to come to you and ask you that question, right? Like, it's a new wife that's in our support group. I know you're really good at reaching out to some new people. So it's a new wife that's in our support group, and she calls you or texts you or whatever it may be and says, well, they're not letting me talk to him, and I need to know all these details. I need to know when he lied to me. I need to know when he did this. I need to know X, all these things. What would you tell that person?
My first question would be, why? Why do you need to know? What purpose does it serve? Like, are you just trying to make yourself more angry? Because that's probably the conversation you're going to have. So quite frankly, you're living two different perspectives anyway. So what you remember may not be what they remember.
Now that is a very powerful point, what you just said, right? And I think sometimes families don't have that perspective, that a lot of what families experience and remember, because they were more of somewhat of a sound mind and clear mind because they didn't have substances in their bodies, is not necessarily what the addict, when they were in active addiction, is going to recall. I've had a lot of instances with my ex-husband where there's certain things that I remembered of him saying and doing that was very hurtful. But if you asked him today, he'd be like, I never said it, right? And now I'm guilty of getting into arguments with him in the past, be like, trying to force him to remember something. It's like trying to plant a memory, right? Trying to plant this thing, like, I want you to remember this. Don't you remember this? And like you said, it served no purpose, because now he's like, he has no recollection of what happened. I'm trying to paint this horrid picture for him. That's increasing how he's feeling, any guilt, shame, other feeling, sadness, or just, feeling bad for what he's done, even though he can't remember it. And what I came to learn to realize through my own therapist is that me wanting to have those conversations on my time, me wanting to bring those things in because I wanted to get it off my chest because I wanted him to know, was actually triggering him a lot of times mentally and emotionally. And because he was in early sobriety and without healthy coping skills or having the time in treatment, time in recovery to apply it, a lot of times he ended up relapsing. Now, I want my audience to hear this very clearly. I didn't make him use, but I contributed to it by not knowing the appropriate time and place to have certain conversations with him. Or like what you just said, Stephanie, there were a lot of things that was going on in my mind that had I had just gone and talked to someone else about it, someone who was more objective in the situation, there's a lot of things that I took to him that I look back on that I would have never spoken to him about because it's not relevant, especially when he doesn't recall it. So I think that was a really, really, really good point that you brought up.
So you're trying to make somebody angry, right? Or feel bad about themselves. What I had to realize is nothing I say is going to make him feel worse about himself than what he's going to do to himself.
Amen.
And that's on him. That's not on me.
Did you find after getting the direction of seeking additional therapy, did you find doing additional therapy in a support system, do you feel that really helped you deal with the emotions that you were carrying as a result of what you experienced with your loved one being in active addiction?
Oh, absolutely. Especially with the emotional aspect of it all. There are things I can talk to my people about, for lack of a better word.
Right.
Emotions wise, that I would never talk to him about, and not because I don't want him to know, just because we understand each other because we've been through the same fight, so to speak.
Right.
Like,
And that's the same thing with the addict.
right.
We have to have our own support and our own people to talk to. I credit a lot of my, I give a lot of credit for my success so far to her and her support group, right? Because like I said, my previous times in treatment, I would come out and she would accuse me of things, which in turn would make me, okay, I'll prove you wrong, right? But now she's going and talking to her support. She's communicating with her support. Well, Nate's doing X, Y, and Z. What do you think? Instead of coming to me with these accusations, right? She's able to talk to somebody else. It's like, well, it might not be worth bringing up, right? It don't sound that bad to me. So that could have I think it has a lot to do with it.
And to bring back a little bit to what Stephanie said with what he just said, because it tied in really well with, so when I asked her for that advice for that, that new person coming into the group that she was talking to, the first thing she said, she's like, well, I would ask why. What is your purpose in bringing this up, right? And so Stephanie continues to utilize her support group so that she has people asking her those questions, right? I tell people all the time, a lot of what I do being an inpatient family therapist is communication. That's like the basis of like most of my sessions. And before we start the session or before we get to the session point of it, I ask them to make a list of what they want to talk about. And when they bring me that list, I say, okay, now why? Why do you want to talk about this? What's the purpose of this? What's the benefit of this? What's the, cons of this? Like, let's map this out. And if you have a good explanation of why, and there's more benefit to it than there is cons, like, okay, let's talk about it. But you need to evaluate, why am I saying this? Why am I asking this? And what purpose is this going to bring me? And, you have to have, Nate said it, we both have to have our support group, because Nate needs to have his people to go through and say, okay, this is what I want to bring to her. And they're going to say, okay, why? Right. And the same thing's going to happen with Stephanie.
So as we wrap this up, I want to give you guys each an opportunity to, to share some wisdom with the audience, any words of advice. But before we get into that, Nate, can you just touch on this just a little bit for our families? Can you just speak a little bit more and give some clarity on why your wife having her own support system and why working her own recovery program or taking a recovery path, why is that helpful and beneficial to you?
Well, I mean, and I'm sure there's a better way to say it. She don't bore me with all her stuff, right?
Spoken like a true man. I'm gonna just chalk that up as spoken as a true man, but continue. Yeah. There are just some things as a woman she wants to talk about that you're not interested in. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. See, there was a better way. No, I mean, she needs to heal, right? And I can't fix everything. She needs her medicines, right? And her people are her medicines.
The same way your people and what you're doing is your medicine for your own healing.
Well, and things that I break it down to, and I may have done this with you all, I don't remember, but something I used to do when I was a primary therapist is I would make my clients build a suitcase. So they would literally draw a suitcase and they would put things in their suitcase that they were holding on to, right? And everything that they put in their suitcase was a weight. And that weight is things that they are adding onto their plate. And if you go back and listen to the previous podcast, I give this long analogy about your legs and the muscles in your legs and things of that nature. And if your family and your support group doesn't have the healing that you're getting, what you're doing is you're taking the weight that's in your suitcase, but also adding their suitcase.
With us having our own support groups, right, we're not putting that weight on each other, right? We have others that can help us carry that weight. It's not weighing each other down. Does that make sense? We can
100%. And that's one of the reasons why I asked you that, because for so many families, they're like, they don't understand why we recommend Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, or to join our, in-house online support group, or why they need an accountability partner. And you just said it. You each have your own experiences as of what the illness of addiction has impacted you both, right? You have your own experiences, and it's not fair to either one of you to have to, in the healing process, to just have to carry that sort of for each other. And that's why developing your own network of support is so important, so that you have people that you can, unleash your burdens to, that understand your side of things and can support you. And Stephanie, as that family member, has her own support system of family members who understand what she's gone through as the family member and can help relieve her of her burdens as well.
Absolutely. Something I've done in my the men's group I'm part of, right, is I've labeled each one of the men. I've labeled them feelings, right? Because a big thing for me is if I was overwhelmed, I was going to use, right? So I labeled one man as fear, and I labeled another as ego, and another as pride, anxiety, all these things, right? All these feelings that I don't want to feel, because if I carry them by myself, right, I'm going to start getting overwhelmed. So all these things we have to walk through life with. And now I have a name for it, right? If I'm feeling fear, I know this guy's going to be there to help me carry it. They all are, right? But I was able to, I don't know. I think that's important for, the support groups to be there for each other. The trust that you get, the care that you feel, the love, right? It's unheard of. Who thought we could actually be humans and live happy
lives, right? Well, I love what you're doing with identifying each person and sort of attaching an emotion to each person, because what it speaks to for me is, and when my sponsor told me that I needed to develop this network of support, I'm like, I'm good with you. I don't need 5 or 6 other people. Like, why do I need to build this network of support? And she said, because there are going to be days where there's certain things that you're experiencing that maybe you can't come to me with it. You may be able to go to someone else with it. And I love when you say, like, one guy, if I'm feeling fearful, he might be able to relate and understand in my fear. Whereas if I'm having anxiety or I'm having guilt and shame, he may not understand. I mean, he might, but for the most part, I may have somebody else, within that network that can really relate and understand that guilt and shame. So I love that system that you have. I think it works best. And I think for our families, they can benefit from that by realizing your partners or your family members, the people you love, they're not meant to meet every need that we have. Absolutely. And one of the things, right? And so that's what the support system is for, is knowing what we need and realizing that if we have a community around us whenever we need something, we can always tap into that community of people to help us, rather than being disappointed because the one person, sort of, we put all our eggs in one basket. And because they can't meet that one need, now we're angry and we're upset, and the world is coming to an end. I see you guys are very slowly being attacked by your dogs in a loving way. So we're gonna wrap this up today. I want to take the time to say thank you to you both for just joining us today and being able to share with us how poor communication really, created a lot of the damage in your relationship. It wasn't just about the drugs and alcohol, and that you both are continuing to work through your communication to be more assertive. And it sounds like from both of you that it's really starting to turn things around for you guys. So your words of wisdom, anything that you want to share with our listeners out there. Nate, maybe you want to speak to a recovering addict that's out there today trying to repair a relationship, or maybe you have something for our families. What would you like to share with them today?
It's the cliche that if it feels uncomfortable, then you probably should do it, right? If you don't want to do it, that's probably when you need to do it. That's true to so many things, and communication is one of them. If you need to say something, don't hold it in. You'll become overwhelmed. If you don't speak to your spouse about it, right? Speak to somebody or write it down. It's all about just getting it out.
Amen. I love that. Thank you. Miss Stephanie, same question. Maybe it's to, an addict that's out there that is in recovery and stepping back into their relationships with their families, and they want to repair those relationships, or there's a family out there you feel that, you want to share some words of wisdom with.
You can't fix it. You can't fix it. It's not your job to fix it. And once you realize or find your hula hoop, you give them the space to find theirs. And once you get out of their way, they have an ability to heal themselves that you wouldn't be capable of.
And when you give them that space, is it fair to say when you give them that space so that they can do their own healing, it opens up a lot of space for you to do your own healing?
Right. Once you start working on yourself and start really being yourself again, they have the freedom to be themselves again. So I would say go find yourself.
Amen. I love that. Thank you.
Getting mad at them is not going to help.
It's not going to make that relationship any better. And I promise for my listeners out there, when you find yourself and your loved ones find themselves, you get to come into this new relationship as new people, leaving, the illness in remission, and you guys get to live much healthier, happier, joyous lives. And you guys are definitely an example of that. So, Miss Alaina, any last words of wisdom that you want to leave with our couple and or with our audience today?
So first, I just want to say I am very proud of you all. I know I've said it to you all before, but I will continue to say it every day. I did give you all the resources, but you all did the legwork, right? You put in the effort day in and day out. You continue to do that. So all the credit goes to you all and what you all have done. And I am extremely proud of the things you have done. Any wisdom for the people that are listening is just reach out. Like it's one of those things that if you're struggling, if you have someone who struggles with addiction, if you are someone that struggles with addiction, whatever it may be, just reach out. Like there is help out there for you. You cannot do it alone. Listen to what these people are saying. They are, that hope shot here, right? It's that experience, strength, and wisdom that they're sharing with you. So you've heard it 1,000 times, so just do it. Just kind of take that next step. So.
All right. Well, thank you. And I always have to plug, at least when we do these shows, the Robert Alexander Center in Mount Washington, Kentucky. If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction within your family, please know that they don't only have services for the loved one that is struggling with drugs and alcohol, but they also have services for our families so that the families can heal together and move along in this journey together. So I just want to say thank you again, everyone, for joining me. Thank you to my audience, and look forward to the next episode coming soon. Thank you. Hi, my name's Natashah Khan. I am a personal development coach. I am a published author, motivational speaker, and I'm here with an opportunity for you today. Do you ever sometimes feel sort of stuck, not really sure where you're heading in life, and or looking back on your life and thinking, I didn't quite always accomplish the things that I wanted? Do you struggle with fear and or anxiety, or you worry all the time? Or maybe you find yourself constantly giving to everyone else, but never really taking time to give to yourself. Or maybe you identify as a codependent and you realize that it's time for you to stop giving so much of yourself to everyone else and to stop and take time to give back to you. Well, you've come to the right place. On Monday evenings from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I host a group that is a private group, so it's invitation only, to members who come together to begin to support each other, lift each other up, inspire each other, and learn the tools necessary on how to find their freedom, how to empower their voices, speak their truth, and discover their authentic selves. So if this sounds like something that you are interested in, you are welcome to reach out to me via email at empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. Again, that is empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. If you are looking to change your life, you are looking to transform and live the life that you've been destined to live, please don't hesitate to reach out today.